to this week's Bible in the News. Since Britain joined the Common Market, the predecessor to the European Union, Bible believers have been convinced that Britain would not remain a member of the Union by the time of Christ's presentation to the world. In 1990, a chapter in the book Guardians to Israel and Arabia, a chapter was titled, "Britain's Exit from Europe is Inevitable." The chapter argued that Britain as Tarshish could not be on both sides of the conflict of Armageddon, and as we see in Ezekiel 38 that Tarshish is opposing, although weakly, the invasion of the land, it cannot also be part of the confederacy of nations that include the EU that come down into the land. 150 years earlier, in 1848, John Thomas wrote, "Europe as a united dominion, Britain cannot be included among them." Before the EU was even formed, Bible believers were convinced that firstly there would be a united Europe, something that looked unlikely during the Napoleonic Wars, and secondly that Britain would be independent of it. These views seemed laughable for decades, but in 2016, the world, except Bible believers, were shocked to wake up to the news that Britain had voted to leave the European Union. Even after this vote, there was much debate about whether Brexit, as it was known, would ever take place. Time and time again it was delayed, until finally, in early 2020, Britain finally left the EU. We, as Bible believers, are not involved in politics, nor are we involved in the arguments of whether Brexit was a good idea, economically, politically, internationally, or from any other perspective that you might evaluate the decision from. We never claimed to know whether the decision was a good or bad decision for the British economy. Neither was it a question that we were particularly interested in compared to the question of Bible prophecy. What interested us as Bible believers was how it was consistent with our understanding of prophecy and the situation at the time of Armageddon. Britain had taken a path consistent with her role as being part of a group of nations who would be critical of the invasion of Israel and Egypt, as described in many Armageddon passages, such as Daniel 12 and Ezekiel 38. Britain leaving the European Union was controversial at the time and remains so to this day. There still exist movements and campaigns that seek to rebuild the ties between the UK and EU, and some who would even like to see Britain rejoin the EU, although these campaigns are remarkably weak. While Britain has left the EU, according to the polling from YouGov, the public are far less sure about the June 23, 2016 decision than they were at the time. While the percentage of the population who believe Brexit was a mistake has increased to 55% from 48% in the referendum, the Leave vote has dropped from 52% down to just 30%, with 14% of voters now not sure. Now, with these figures as the fundamentals, you would expect a reversal of Brexit to be a real political possibility, with political parties holding this as their policy. You'd expect pro-EU voices to have momentum, with pro-Brexit politicians being hard hit by the 55% of the population who now believe it was a mistake. However, the opposite is true. The idea of rejoining the EU is not supported by a single mainstream political party. The Liberal Democrats, who during the Brexit years were known and accepted the label proudly as the Stop Brexit Party, who still claim on their website to be the most pro-EU party in the UK today, did not commit to rejoining the EU in their 2024 manifesto, nor do they hold that as their position today. In contrast, and at the same time, self-styled Mr. Brexit, Nigel Farage, has never been so popular. Last week in the UK local elections, Nigel Farage's party, Reform UK, swept to a victory even larger than had been expected by the pollsters. Reform gained a control of a total of 10 councils, while 3 were won by the Liberal Democrats, and the rest were all under no overall control. The two main parties, Labour and the Conservatives, didn't win a single council. Reform also won a by-election and 2 mayorships. Sky News used the results to project the support for the various parties nationwide, and they put Reform at 32%, compared to the Labour and the Conservatives on 19 and 18% respectively. Laura Koonsberg wrote a BBC article entitled "This Week Proves Nigel Farage's MP ambitions is not a wild notion." Now again, as Bible believers, we are not interested in politics for political reasons, but prophetical reasons. The political landscape we see in the UK is one where, despite the fact that a vote to rejoin the EU would be the likely result from any new referendum, the existence of Reform makes the idea of such a referendum a political impossibility. Reform forces the two main parties to compete for the anti-EU vote, making Labour wary of improving ties with the EU, and the Conservatives consider going further, such as leaving the ECHR, which is a European court. They consider that more seriously. As Bible believers, we believe that Britain didn't leave the EU because it was the will of the people, but because it was the will of God. Britain has a role that isn't one she has chosen, but one that God has chosen. That role is to be with Sheba and Dedan with her young lion powers, and weekly criticize what the nations are doing to the people of God. This has been Paul Barnes joining you for this week's Bible in the News.